forget. There we go. My name is Caroline Omaleski. I'm from the Office of International Affairs. I'm the academic liaison for international students. And your presenter today is Lauren Putz, who's from the Dennis Learning Center. So she will be primarily the one leading the conversation today. Before I hand it over to Lauren, I just want to remind you that we have a lot of really great workshops and programs and events and all kinds of things going on during these 2 weeks prior to the start of classes. So if you haven't already taken a look, and I'm sure you have because you're here, but if you haven't taken a look at the calendar of events in the calendar section of the orientation Carmen course, make sure that you do that. I'm just going to take a quick peek of what's going on today. It looks like there's another workshop at 10:30 on practicing spoken English. And then we have a group lunch at 11:30, a tour of the RPAC later this afternoon, and then a welcome to Columbus presentation. So even just today, there's a ton going on. So make sure that you try to take advantage of some of that throughout these weeks. So you are welcome to turn your video on. You don't have to, especially maybe if your internet connection doesn't feel as strong. Lauren may have some participation as we go along, especially since that's our topic for the day. So be ready maybe to speak aloud or to type things into the chat throughout the workshop. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Caroline. I really appreciate the introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we will go ahead and get started. Right. Wonderful. Can everybody see that well? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, perfect. Lovely. Thank you all so much. So we're going to start off today by talking about participating in discussions and preparing class presentations. So the top things that we're going to be paying attention to in this presentation are building relationships with professors, asking questions in class, discussing ideas with your professors, and then discussing academic performance with faculty. Some of those things will be covered, and then as well as giving presentations in class, working successfully in groups with American classmates, and then understanding and participating in class discussions. We also have a presentation coming up where we will talk about discussing ideas with your professors and how to converse with your professors later on this week or next. So today we're going to talk about actively participating in class discussions and how to prepare, practice, and provide class presentations. So before we get started with any content, just take a second to think about why it's important to participate in class discussions. And then if you have any kind of concerns about participating in class discussions, you can absolutely put it in the chat if you would like, or you can go ahead and just shout them out. I know for me, I don't like participating in class discussions, or it's hard for me because I'm worried that I might say something wrong, or other people might not understand what I'm trying to convey when we talk in class. And if you guys aren't concerned about class discussions, that's also really great. I'm glad to hear that. All right, so we will go ahead and move along to our first objective. So right now we're going to be talking about preparing for class discussions. So before class, you're going to want to do the readings and practice problems, take notes, and prepare questions. So when we're doing the readings and practice problems, sometimes professors will go ahead and assign you certain practice problems or suggest that you do them. This can be really helpful so you know what's going on in class and what's going to be covered before class starts. If there's a language barrier, this can also be really helpful as well, so you at least have an idea of what's going on, and then you can ask the professor to slow down or re-explain themselves if you're having trouble understanding, which is again totally fine, and professors are going to be more than happy to help you better understand what's going on in class. Before class, taking notes is going to be really important. So maybe you want to start by outlining what you did in the readings or the practice problems. I know for me, if I'm going to be taking a chemistry class especially, I'll go ahead and outline the chapter. So I just kind of know what's going on and I don't have to take time away from listening to the professor by doing headings or writing down definitions. And I already have those key things written down. And then finally, preparing questions can be really important, especially if you're having trouble understanding the English that's going on in class, which is, again, totally fine. But preparing those questions just to kind of ask clarifying questions or making sure that you're on the right track can be helpful. So during or before class, we also want to make sure that you are taking notes, or during class taking notes. These are two great examples of how you can take notes during class. We have the 5-paragraph essay outline. Obviously, you can do this in any way that feels comfortable to you, but maybe you would want to start with a main point and then a supporting point and then subtopic points. Or on the left, this is a mind map. You can absolutely use a mind map kind of deal when you're taking notes if that makes your kind of ideas flow a little bit better. But it is also important to make sure that when you're taking notes, you are trying to still pay attention in class and engage yourself in that discussion as well. This is another example of how to take notes in class. These are called Cornell notes. So in Cornell notes, you would want to have the title of what you're studying at the top of the page. And then in the right-hand column, you're going to be writing down all of the things that are happening in class. So all of the notes from class. And then in the left-hand column, you're going to ask questions. So if you're confused about anything, this is a great time to kind of highlight what you're confused about and then write a question down that you could ask your professor either before or after class. And then after class, at the bottom section, you can absolutely summarize what you've learned. This is a great way to kind of test your understanding and make sure that you don't have any questions and that you really are able to kind of summarize what's going on in class quickly. So with taking notes, you just want to be prepared. Make sure that you are understanding the main idea, asking yourself what the most interesting point is, whether you agree or disagree about it, or if you're confused about it. This is a great way to have a class discussion, just kind of asking yourself those questions before the actual discussion happens. So our second objective for this section of the presentation is getting involved in class discussions. So here we want you to take a really active role in talking to your classmates, whether they are American classmates or from other parts of the world as well. This is just a great way to interact with any and all classmates you may have. Make sure that you ask relevant questions. So when you're in class, you can ask your professor lots of questions, but I know sometimes, the professor will open up the floor to questions that they may have. So don't ask questions like, oh, do you have a dog? I know in like smaller classes, that's kind of funny, or like if you're trying to get to know your professor, that's like sometimes okay. But if you're in those like bigger lectures, just make sure that you're asking questions relevant to the actual topic at hand. Answering questions is equally important. It shows that you're paying attention in class. It shows that you really want to take an active role in your learning. It's totally okay for you not to know the perfect answer, but if you can kind of like start the ball rolling on how to answer a question that your professor may have, that's a really great way to continue a discussion in class. You can absolutely make comments on what you're learning and give your own opinion, especially if you're in a political science class or a sociology class. Just saying like, wow, I think that this topic that we're learning is really interesting. I think I've seen this example in my real life through this thing that happened to you. That can be a really great way to participate in those class discussions and show your professor again that you are paying attention and that you know what's going on and that you're excited to relate that back to what you're learning. And you can always disagree or agree, but make sure that you explain why. So if you're in a class discussion and you don't necessarily agree with what your classmate has said, That's totally fine. You can just say, hey, you know what? I don't think I agree with this. This is why, based on what we're talking about right now. So just make sure that you give evidence when you're saying why you agree or disagree. Initiating class participation can be a little bit difficult, but sometimes it's really important. So maybe you have a question, maybe you have a comment that you really think is going to add to the class. Just try to signal your intention to say something. You can raise your hand, you can make eye contact with the professor, you can start to like raise your hand, make eye contact and say like, excuse me, professor, but that's totally okay. And then finally, you can type into the chat. If you're on Zoom, hopefully, you know, we're starting to transition back into those in-person classes, but if you are on Zoom, you can absolutely message the professor publicly or privately and say, hey, I have this suggestion, could I say it out loud? But just make sure that you organize your thoughts in your head before you speak, and wait until everyone who is done speaking, or everyone who's speaking is finished, and then you can add to what's going on. And then another way to initiate participation is in small groups. So maybe your professor is going to have you kind of like break out into smaller groups in your larger class. Make sure that when you are with those people, you pay attention to the verbal and physical cues. So if somebody asks a question, you can absolutely answer it. If there's a pause in the conversation, you can definitely speak up and say, hey, you know what, I really liked learning about this today, or I think that this thing that the professor was talking about is going to be very beneficial when we go to work on a project. If you're in person, you can look around and make sure that everybody is done talking, or if nobody wants to make eye contact with you, you can kind of take charge and make sure that you are starting that conversation. Especially if there's, you know, that awkward silence. And a really great way to initiate that participation and kind of take charge of your small group is to offer to take notes. So if you are the person writing down the notes that, you know, shows the group that you are interested in participating with them, and also takes a burden off of them so that they're more willing to give ideas, and then you can write them down. So if you're not as comfortable talking in the group, this is a great way to participate as well. And then when we are talking about participation in class and you want to express your own thoughts, just make sure that you are using words like I think, or I believe, or it seems to me, or I feel that, or I suppose, or I guess. This shows that you are going to talk about what you think of the topic and not necessarily give a fact. You're going to be giving an opinion or a thought. And we'll get a little bit more into this and have some practice. So we just talked about ways to signal that you are going to be giving an opinion. So using statements like I think, I feel, or I believe. I want you to type into the chat your opinion about the best animal. So tell me, you know, what the best animal is using statements like I think, I believe, or I feel, and then tell me why it's the best, using, again, those same statements. So I can go first as an example. I think that cats are the best animal because I like it when my kitten is really clumsy and kind of stumbles down the stairs. I think that that's really cute. So that is a great kind of example of how to use those I think, I feel, I believe statements to give your own opinion. So if anyone wants to tell me why they think that cats are also the cutest animal, that would be great. Or you can politely disagree with me and tell me what animal is your favorite. Yeah, absolutely. Francisco, go ahead. Thank you so much for raising your hand. You can just absolutely shout out. We're all friends here. No worries.
All right. Well, I have to politely disagree. I think dogs are the best animal because of their unconditional love.
Okay.
Like you can be any kind of person and usually dogs love you. Cats sometimes do too, but it's more of a mood for them.
I understand. Thank you for that participation. I really appreciate it. And that's a really great example of how you would participate in a class discussion.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Would anybody else like to agree or disagree with me or Francisco? not, that's totally okay. I know we're all coming from different time zones, or if you're here in Columbus, it is 9 a.m. and I am CDB. All right, so we're gonna move along. So again, with this kind of idea of talking about using those I think, I feel, I believe statements, you can also say what you think without using those kinds of statements. So obviously, me thinking that cats are the best animal is not a fact, but I could say cats are the best animal. And, you know, then you can back it up with support, and that can become your opinion, but a great way to put it into a paper or a great way to put it into a speech. So we'll kind of get into that. We definitely don't have to practice, you know, saying that dogs and cats are the best animals without those I think, I feel statements, but I know that you guys understand that concept. So thank you all so much for your participation in that. I really appreciate it. So we're going to stay on the topic of initiating participation. A somewhat awkward or, you know, necessary but a little bit awkward thing that may come up is that you have to interrupt people while they're speaking when you are in class. So, you know, there's a good way to do it and there's a bad way to do it. So make sure that when you are needing to interrupt, it's something that needs to be said right now in the given time frame of the discussion. So you're saying, excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I do have to add this statement. Or, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Could you please go back so I can stay on track with this discussion? Or, hey, I didn't understand that last point. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Could you please repeat that? Or if you need kind of a clarifying statement to be said while you're in class and you just need to interrupt, it's totally okay. If you are in class or if you're in a discussion, you can kind of just raise your hand and say, hey, I'm so sorry, excuse me, what did you mean when you said blank? So those are all really great ways to interrupt politely. I know sometimes it can get really frustrating when you're in class and the professor just keeps going and going and you can't understand them or they're going too fast. It's totally okay for you to raise your hand and say, I'm so sorry, professor. Do you mind repeating yourself or could you slow down a little bit? Most professors are totally going to understand that they sometimes can go on a rant about whatever they're talking about because they love the subject so much, but they know that, you know, you might not be into theoretical physics as much as they are, and they would be happy to slow down and kind of re-explain themselves. Just make sure you're saying like, I'm sorry, excuse me, could you please repeat that when you do have to interrupt. So when we're talking about talking to other, you know, students or talking with professors and you want to comment on what somebody else said, you can think, or you can like kind of segue into what you want to say by saying their name. So I think that Francisco made an interesting point when he said that dogs are the best animal because, you know, I love dogs, but like, have you ever seen a kitten? You know, like that, that kind of thing. Or I'd like to add something to what Francisco said. I also think that dogs are the best animal because they can play fetch, that kind of thing. But make sure that you are addressing the person who just spoke. Maybe if you don't know their name, you could say, I think what that student just said was really important. And I would like to also add that, you know, this statement, you know, supports the topic as well. You can also say, going off of that point, I think that blank, or can I come back to what Francisco said about saying that dogs are the best animal? I think that, you know, rabbits are the best animal because they have big ears or something like that. So just when you want to comment on something that someone else said, try to use their name or try to say, you know, based on what the last student said, this is what I think. Another kind of example of this is to agree with the previous speaker. So I agree with what Francisco said. For example, dogs are the best animal because I love when their tails wag, something like that. Or Francisco said that dogs are the best animal. I agree with this statement because I like that they're easy to take care of, or something like that. You can also just say, you know, if you don't remember Francisco's name or you didn't catch a name, you can say, I agree with the last student. In my opinion, dogs are the best animal because they're fluffy or something like that. Just making sure that you support your support why you agree. And then if you are agreeing with a specific person, try to use their name or try to say student if you don't remember their name. So just make sure that you're either giving an example, you're giving a reason as to why you agree, or you're elaborating as to why you agree with the last person that spoke. So alternatively, we can disagree with the previous speaker. You know, you can say, I don't agree with what Francisco said about dogs being the best animal. I think that cats are the best animal because they are smaller and they are easier to take care of, or, you know, along those lines. You can say, you know, Lauren said that dogs or that cats were the best animal. I would argue that dogs are the best animal because they're bigger and more fun to play with. You could also say, if you are talking in a larger group, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that cats are the best animal, and then give a supporting example. You can also say, if you don't remember, you know, remember the name, or if you don't want to say outright, I disagree with that, you can say, that is one way to look at your opinion. Another way to look at it might be, and then give a supporting example as to what your opinion is. So when you do have to disagree with someone, make sure that you reframe disagreements in a constructive way. I know sometimes when I'm in a class discussion and we need to get something done in class, and somebody is just kind of going off on a tangent or says something that's wrong, I want to say, you know, that doesn't make sense at all, but I need to be nice because it is not, you know, it's not their fault. We're all just kind of like brainstorming ideas. If they say something that I don't agree with, I could instead say, I don't know if I agree. Could you tell me a little bit more about why you think that? And then that allows the student to feel heard. That allows the student to kind of explain themselves a little bit more. And maybe they just didn't explain what they were trying to say the right way the first time. And then when they re-explained it, it makes a lot more sense and actually works for the class discussion. Instead of saying, I don't think that's the right answer, you could kindly just say, hey, maybe we should try that problem again. I don't know if that looks right. And it's okay to tell people like, hey, I don't think that that's necessarily right, but just make sure that you do it in a polite way, and you offer a solution. So the solution would be, you know, trying the problem again together in a different way. And then instead of saying, oh, like, let's vote on it, if you have to decide quickly on, you know, a group name or the topic that you're going to be presenting on, you can just say, hey, does everyone agree? And then allow people to either agree or disagree with you. All right. And then next we want to talk within class discussions, we want to talk about shaping discussions. So a really great way to start to shape a discussion is to connect it to the readings. So referring to the readings could start along the lines of, the author suggests that cats are the best animal. However, I think that dogs are the best animal. Or according to Lauren, cats are the best animal in the book that she wrote, or something like that. You could also say, how do you relate what Lauren said? In her article, she stated that cats are the best animal. Do you think that that's applicable to all people? Or something like that. So just making sure that when you are trying to connect your discussion to the reading, making sure that you're referring back to specific points in the reading that probably everybody has looked at. So if you are going to say, if you're going to refer to the reading and say, oh, you know, like, I think that the author makes a good point here, qualify your contribution. Or if you are going to give a comment in class, make sure that you're qualifying your contribution by saying, I'm not familiar with this in the US, but in my country, it's a very similar situation, or something like that. You could also say, I don't know much about eating pizza in the US, but in China, we definitely have a different set of culinary skills. You could also say, I don't have first-hand experience with liking hot dogs, but the impression I got from the group of American students that I just talked to was that hot dogs are really popular on campus or something, kind of along those lines. So just making sure that when you are saying something in class, you have a reason to back it up, or you have an example to back it up. So in class discussions, sometimes professors are going to allow you room for speculation. Speculation is guessing, is just, kind of putting words in the author's mouth based on an educated guess. So make sure that when you are speculating, you're going to want to indicate that you are speculating or guessing. So ways that you can initiate this is by saying, I'm just guessing. You could use the words might be, or you could use the words perhaps. So especially in the perhaps example, if you are in a chemistry class or a class that has experiments or is going to be talking about experiments, you could say the experiment might have failed because of blank, or perhaps the experiment failed because of this. Just make sure that you are saying, I think that the experiment failed because of something. But when you are speculating, just make sure that you're indicating that so the professor doesn't think that you are giving a fact and then they don't have to correct you. Because obviously, I'm sure that all of you, don't want to be corrected on something that you're just speculating about. So just make sure that you indicate it. So we've finished our little spiel about class discussions. So just to review, make sure that you're prepared for discussions by reading, thinking, and writing beforehand. So that's just preparing for class, preparing an outline, preparing what you want to say based on the readings that the professor has assigned. You can practice those useful phrases that we were just talking about. So the I think, I feel, I believe, the excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, the I agree because, the I disagree because, indicating when you're speculating, making sure that you give examples. All of those phrases can be really helpful, especially when you're trying to communicate with American classmates. And then finally, just be confident. It matters more about the content that you're saying than how you say it. And I know a lot of your American classmates are going to be very excited to hear what you have to say, because it is really exciting that we have a lot of international students at Ohio State, and it gives us a really great way to be able to meet people outside of our cultural norms as well. So we want to hear what you have to say. It's really important to us, and we're very excited when you want to participate in class discussions and we make you feel comfortable enough to do that. So just be confident and know that, we're here for you and we're excited to listen to you as well. So moving on to class presentations. So we're going to talk about preparing presentations first. So there are a few steps to starting a presentation. When you're preparing it, you want to start by planning. You're going to do research on your topic, narrow down your focus, and then be aware of your audience.
I'm sorry.
No, that's totally okay.
I'd like to ask a question regarding participation and discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least in my culture, I'm from Mexico.
Sure.
I've been dealing as a student that sometimes when you overly participate with the professor, at least some of the students started to get a negative opinion of you because they think you are hoarding the professor sometimes, and it becomes just a one-by-one conversation. I wonder if in the US academic culture, can something similar happen, that where the professor might like you, but the students might form this negative opinion of you?
That is a really great point to bring up, Francisco. Thank you so much for that. I think that in American culture, we're not as concerned about it. I know that, if you feel like you're participating too much, it's okay to kind of take yourself out of that situation and just let other people answer. But if you're noticing that you're classmates aren't stepping up to the plate and answering questions as well, it's okay for you to go ahead and just step up and say, you know what, I know what's going on in this class. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to participate. And that shows your professor that you're very engaged in the class. But obviously, if other people want to participate as well, just make sure that you do give them the space for that instead of just like shouting out. So a way to avoid that is by raising your hand before, and it's totally okay that you ask the question without raising your hand, but like if you're in class, just, you know, if you're sensing that other people want to participate as well, just raise your hand instead of like shouting out the answer. Caroline, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a great point to bring up. And I think it depends a lot on the dynamic of the class and how engaged the other students are. I think when you're lucky, if you're that person who really loves participating and loves sharing your opinions and ideas, I think that's exactly what your professors want. Unfortunately, not every student in the class is going to be like that. So, you know, if you're lucky, you'll find yourself in a class with a lot of rather really engaged students, and that definitely will happen. There might be other classes where people are a little more sort of tepid about stepping in. Don't worry about them too much. I would say just go ahead and participate, because that is part of the expectation, generally speaking, here. I would say on the flip side of that, I was just thinking about how one thing that I actually hear pretty routinely from international students is that they feel like American students say too much in class, like make a lot of comments that are maybe not needed or irrelevant or not very well thought through. And a lot of international students are like, well, I don't want to say anything unless I have something like really interesting or, you know, well thought through to say. And I would say, don't let that stop you from participating, because even if you don't have like the most profound thought, just see it as practicing that skill of speaking out loud. I think, you know, even if you're worried about your English, just see it as practicing that skill, because the more that you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with it. Yeah, but thank you, Francisco, for bringing that up, because I think it's a fair point.
I totally agree. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that, you know, I think that you shouldn't worry about what other people think, and if you're excited to participate, then you should. So back to planning a class presentation. When we're doing our research, you want to kind of be aware of what topic and what you're being asked, and focus your research on that. So narrowing down your focus can be going from, okay, I am giving a class presentation on trees, but instead of giving a class presentation on everything about a tree, you could narrow it down to how trees photosynthesize, and then research on that. But then make sure that when you are going to give the presentation on how trees photosynthesize, being aware of your audience. Are you giving it in a chemistry class? Are you giving it in a political science class? Are you giving it in an English class? Obviously, you know, you're probably not going to give a presentation on how trees photosynthesize in a political science class, but just making sure that you are aware of your audience, and regardless of who you're presenting to, you can either say, okay, I'm giving, you know, this presentation on photosynthesis in my chemistry class, so I'm not going to have to define as many words as I would in a class that is for, you know, that is mostly people who are studying English and may not be as familiar with chemistry concepts or biology concepts, things like that. So just making sure that you know when and where to define words, making sure that you are giving a presentation in a way that people can understand, and you're not going above their head, or you're not, you know, dumbing it down too much either. So when we're talking about structuring your presentation, you're going to want to think of it as an outline. So we're going to start by stating the topic and outlining the scope of the presentation. So that will be like your first couple slides, or your first, you know, couple sentences or paragraphs if you're giving a speech. So stating the topic, just saying, I'm going to talk about how trees photosynthesize. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about the sun being, you know, a source of nutrients, how the leaves can expand and like shape themselves to gather the sun as much as possible, and how the roots of the tree, you know, are able to get all of that nutrients. And then you can go into explaining those ideas with the evidence that you found when you did your research. So the sun, the sun is important. It's important because of this. Leaves are able to shape themselves to gather as much sun as possible because of this scientific phenomenon. And then, the roots get the nutrients from the leaves and the sun because it's able to travel down the trunk of the tree. And then you're going to want to sum up all of those points that you just talked about in the presentation and then review the topic. So all of these things together allow, the tree to get its nutrients and allows the tree to continue to live and grow. And that's important because blank. So just making sure that you are thinking about the background, the thesis, support, summary, and then why it matters is kind of like a larger summary and review. You can also think of structuring your presentation as a roadmap. So you can always use the words first, then next, and finally. And then when we're talking about this, we want to kind of think about the 3 T's. So the 3 T's are going to be tell them what you're going to tell them. So photosynthesis is important. And then tell them. So you're going to tell them. So I guess a better example would be tell them what you're going to tell them would be today I'm going to talk about photosynthesis. And then you tell them about photosynthesis. And then you review what photosynthesis was with the tell them what you told them. So another great way to think about this is go into an overview for the first T, actual info for the second T, and then summary and conclusion for the third T. And then if you are going to give an in-class presentation that requires notes or requires a speech, kind of anything like that, you do want to prepare notes. I think an important thing to note here is that you can prepare your notes in your own language as well, but just make sure that you translate them if needed. So that way it's easier for you to read them, and then you can kind of take a second to say like, oh, okay, I can translate this really quick, but I know exactly what I'm going to say in the language that makes the most sense to me. And then we'll get a little bit more into preparing the notes, but just make sure that once you've prepared your notes, try not to use more than 1 or 2 of the note cards. That way you're making more eye contact with the audience that you have, and it's going to feel more like a conversation and less like you're reading off of note cards right here. So when you're preparing notes, write your presentation as a whole text. So that's step 1. So kind of write it out like an outline where you're saying like, okay, today I'm going to talk about this. Here are my supporting points. And then here is my conclusion. And that's all written out on 1 page. And then you can kind of convert it to how you would speak to a class, how you would speak to your friends, and add in filler, add in a few more examples. Like right now, I'm not reading off of a script. I'm just talking to you guys because we're friends and this is like a fun presentation. So make sure that when you're converting it to spoken language, you just kind of think about how you would actually present it, so you don't sound like a robot kind of. When you are writing down things on the flashcards or making bullet points that you're going to read off of, highlight those keywords so you remember what you want to say without having to read off the entire bullet point. So photosynthesis would be a keyword, knowing that the sun is, the like most important part of the photosynthesis chain is going to be important. Being able to talk about the different like cycles that happen within photosynthesis would be keywords that you want to highlight. All of those good things, but just making sure that if you do have like some key points that you are trying to get across, you just highlight those main words so you're able to not necessarily look at the card the whole time. And then you can put those keywords or key points on note cards in bullet points. So if I was going to look off of note cards today, I would have preparing notes as an important point that I want to talk about, roadmaps is an important point that I want to talk about, and class discussions as an important point that I want to talk about. And then I would elaborate those using my own words. And then along with notes and giving a presentation, you're probably going to have PowerPoint slides. So if, I showed you a PowerPoint that kind of looked like this and how rivers are formed, you're going to leave the Zoom, and I would understand if you left the Zoom, because that's really hard to read. That's a lot of words, and I probably would just read word for word off of this slide and you would get really bored. So just make sure that your slides are engaging, they're easy to read, they look fun. They have the main points only. So all of the things that are on this slide right here are the things that you want to make sure that you add on to your own slides. And then also make sure that they're visually appealing. So you can add pictures, you can do little transitions, you can make things animated, you can do a lot with PowerPoint, and that just does come free through Ohio State. So if you are interested in making class presentations, you'll be able to download Office 365 and have all of the PowerPoint tools right at your fingertips. And then you can download that onto your personal computer as well. And that's how this presentation was made. And then when we're talking about class presentations, we also want to talk about practicing and using that feedback that you get. So make sure that you know your content. You want to be authentic. It's okay to say, like, oh, I'm a little nervous right now, or, we're all friends. Like, it's okay to laugh. It's okay to like crack jokes while you're giving your presentation, but make sure it like stays on some level professional, and that goes along with understanding your audience. So making sure that you make eye contact people. I know it's going to be a little bit harder on Zoom to make eye contact because you're just looking at a camera, but just kind of like finding one person who has their camera on and looking at them helps. So like right now I'm staring at Francisco, but it's okay, and I'm also staring at Caroline's picture, but it's all good. And then you might want to think about what to do with your hands. Obviously, you guys can't see my hands, but I'm like talking a lot with my hands right now. They're just like below my camera, so you can't see them. But a great, rule of thumb is to just have them at your sides. Try not to talk too much with your hands. Or if, you're going to feel like you need to talk with your hands, you can kind of cross your hands like this and just put them like in front of you if you're standing up. And then make sure that you are paying attention to the filler words that you're using. I'm sure that you guys have heard me say a lot of times during this presentation. That's okay. Just try to make sure that you aren't using them so much that all you're hearing is I know that has happened to me a lot. I know I just did it subconsciously right now, but it's totally okay. Sometimes it happens, but just try your best to make sure that you aren't using those filler words as much as possible. And then if it's helpful for you, you can also just kind of like pause to collect your thoughts, let yourself think, and let your listener think. So it is really, really, really important that you practice your presentations. I practiced this presentation last night in front of my cats. I practiced it this morning before we got on this call, but I've given it plenty of times, but I still like to practice because it's really important that you know exactly the content that you're going to be giving to your class. So you can rehearse the presentation that you're going to give in front of your friends, family, a mirror if you need to. That can be really helpful. You can also try to record yourself. That way you can see if you're using too many filler words like or like, and then you can also make sure that you notice if you're giving enough eye contact to the camera, if you are looking down at your notes too much. All of those good things can kind of be seen when you record yourself. And then do make sure that you time yourself. That way you don't go over time if there's a time limit, or you're not like speeding through the presentation. Timing yourself is a really great way to kind of understand how to meet in the middle and be concise and use main points, but then, not talk way too much. And then finally, we want to use feedback when we are practicing for any kind of presentation. So using your own feedback by paying attention to your body language and voice. So if you notice that you're slouching, make sure that you sit up. If you notice that you're forgetting to make eye contact, just try your best and try to continue to make eye contact. Make sure that your voice is loud enough. And then if you notice that people are not making eye contact with you, if they're looking down, if they're kind of like looking away like this, that might mean that they're not as interested, or maybe they can't hear you, but they don't want to say anything. So just making sure that you're staying engaging, you're talking loud enough, you're using hand gestures when it's appropriate, you are standing tall and confident, and you're making sure that you are using those time limits to the best of your ability. So with class presentations, there may be Q&A sessions. I know after this presentation, I will kind of leave it up to you guys to ask any and all questions that you have. And I don't know what kinds of questions you're going to ask me, so I just have to be prepared for those. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can prepare for them as well. So a general rule of thumb is to always allow yourself some time at the end of any presentation to ask questions. So if you're asked a question that you're a little bit stressed to answer, just pause, just take a minute, kind of like think about the question, repeat the question that you got asked, and then try to give an answer that way. If you don't understand the question, that's totally okay. You can ask your audience to repeat themselves, to clarify, to reword the question so you can better answer it. When you are answering a question, make sure that you are talking to the whole group instead of just the person that asked you the question. That way everybody can get the same kind of experience from it, and feel included as well. And then make sure that you allow for follow-up questions. So when Francisco asked that great question earlier, I kind of paused for a minute to make sure that nobody else had any comments or had anything that they wanted to say about the subject that we were talking about. And then Caroline also popped in and had a lot of great answers to give as well. So if you are giving a presentation with multiple people, you can kind of allow yourself to take a step back and say like, oh, hey, Caroline, do you have anything to add to this? And that can be a really helpful way to allow yourself to gather thoughts, but allow other people to also have time to present and participate as well. And then finally, it is totally okay for you to not know an answer. I don't know if you guys ask me questions and I don't know the answer, I will probably pass it off to Caroline, and that's totally okay. I can absolutely admit that I don't know the answer and offer to look it up, and you guys can absolutely do the same. Yes, Tangku, could you please pronounce your name for me? I'm so sorry.
Hi,
Hi, go ahead. Thank you so much for raising your hand.
can I ask, what if some students ask the question that out of topic?
The question of
Yeah, like totally not in our discussion, like out of the topic.
Like
yeah.
something off topic.
oh yeah, if they ask something off topic, you can absolutely say like, oh, I'm sorry, that doesn't, involve what we're talking about right now. Just politely, kind of like guide them back into what you should be talking about. So if you guys, like ask me a question about what my favorite food is, I would be like, I would be happy to answer that after the presentation. But right now, we're talking about class participation and class discussions. Do you have any questions about that? Just kind of like politely guiding them back to what you should be talking about is probably the best way to handle that. Caroline, do you have anything to add to that? I guess I've never really had that happen to me.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that what you said is exactly right. If you just sort of politely say that you would be happy to discuss that, but it wasn't something that you necessarily prepared as part of this presentation. Yeah, I don't think that that will be a huge concern necessarily in presentations that you would be giving in class. And I think your professor will also be there to guide the discussion. And if someone leads it in a direction that isn't appropriate for whatever reason, you can kind of lean on them a little bit too to draw things back to the topic.
Exactly. Thank you so much. All right. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Tingy, do you have a question?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Ting Ye. You could call me Ting. Sorry, I have a question about directing your remarks to other people? Because I was wondering if I found a question I've been asked by others and I don't know that answer, and will other be willing to, you know, like accept that question for me? Because I'm not sure like other participants if they know the answer about the question, or they just want to be listen to my presentation but not answering the question for me.
That is a really great point. I think that you could, if you don't know the answers specifically, you could absolutely open it up to your classmates and say, hey, you know, like I'm giving this presentation, but if you guys have any kind of suggestions or thoughts on this question that, and you could answer it better than I could, then you could absolutely let them answer it. But if you're not comfortable with that, you could absolutely say like, I'm so sorry, that question goes beyond the scope of what I researched today, but I will absolutely get back to you with it. But if you do have classmates that are giving the presentation with you, kind of like how I'm giving the presentation with Caroline, you can absolutely say like, oh, hey, Caroline, do you have any thoughts on this? Because they may be able to answer the question better than you could.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. All right, so finally, we're going to talk a little bit about overcoming the fear of public speaking. And I think that this goes for anyone and everyone, not just international students. It is really hard to get up and stand in front of classmates and talk to them about something that you're maybe not necessarily the most passionate about, but that's okay. So some really great ways to kind of help get over the fear of public speaking, help make it less taboo, help make it less fearful for you, have less pressure, you can create a pre-routine. So a pre-routine is going to be, you know, getting up, making sure that you have breakfast, making sure that you drink lots of water, make sure that you go through the presentation at least once. Any day that you are giving a presentation, you can use that pre-routine. You can, you know, if you guys have ever seen High School Musical, when like Evan and Sharpay are like doing those weird little like voice warm-ups, you can do that if that, you know, like floats your boat. I know sometimes I have to do that just to like get the shivers out, and that's okay. Before you give a speech or before you start talking to your classmates, you can absolutely just take a few deep breaths. You know, it's like very nice to just go like, and just like calm down for a second. You don't have to start speaking right away. You can just like slow your breathing and, you know, try to center yourself before you start talking. Always think of yourself as being successful as well. That's going to be really helpful, especially when it comes to giving presentations in person. Just make sure that, you know, you feel confident and you look confident, and that's really going to help your presentation convey a lot of positivity and a lot of success. When you are presenting, just speak slowly. That way you can get your thoughts across, and you can kind of think while you're talking and people can hear you. And if you get nervous and speed up a little bit, if you're already consciously trying to talk slower, you're not going to sound super, super fast when you're talking. And then just remember that experience definitely builds confidence. So the more that you give presentations, the less you're going to be worried about it. And I think that's something that's important to remember, is that everybody is afraid of public speaking, and it is not the end of the world for you to blank or to say a lot or to talk really fast, because you will have plenty of opportunities to give presentations and have public speaking opportunities. And then just like using that experience to feel more confident is going to be really important. But I know that you guys can do it. So this is a quote from an international student from US News. They said that often what international students really lack is a little courage to take the first step. So I'm encouraging you guys to have faith in yourself, to feel confident in yourself, and know that you are at Ohio State for a reason, and that we're really excited that you guys are here and that you're going to do amazing in all of your class discussions, your class participation, your class presentations. I know that you guys can do it. And you have all of the tools to do it successfully as well. But thank you all so much for, sitting through this presentation with me and hanging out with me today. I'm just going to go over a few things about the Dennis Learning Center for you guys so that I hopefully see you in my office from time to time because we really do love supporting you academically. So at the Dennis Learning Center, we do give workshops like this. This is a special workshop for the Office of International Affairs. So we really won't give this one a lot except to you guys, but if you are part of a dorm, maybe part of a student group, and you guys are interested in talking about any of these topics, feel free to go to our website and request any of these workshops. We just ask that 7 people register. 7 people don't have to show up, but that way, we kind of have a good group for a discussion. We also offer classes. So if you guys are feeling like you need a little bit more support in your academics in way of a class, we have plenty of classes that are under ESE/PSY, and you can just search those on our schedule planner on Buckeye Link. They're 3 credit-hour electives, and they are proven to help boost your GPA if you successfully complete them and then use those strategies outside of class as well. And then finally, our coaching, which is what I do. We love to meet with you guys. They're free 1-hour appointments where we can talk about any and all academic issues that you may be having, whether it's ranging from concentration to study habits to note taking to time management, all those good things. They are unlimited. We just ask that you meet us once per week and no more than that, but you don't have to meet us every week. So if you find a coach that you like and you have some goals that you want to set, they'd be happy to meet with you every week just to check in on you. But we would love to see you guys if you have any kind of questions regarding your academics. But thank you all so much. If you're interested in following us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, it is actually at DLC_OSU. We do have some workshop series coming up if you guys are interested in watching those outside of the Office of International Affairs presentations as well. But I will go ahead and pass it back to Caroline. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Lauren. That was great. Does anybody have any questions or even comments or things that you want to share or ask about related to class participation or presentations before we wrap up? Don't be shy. It's a good opportunity and a safe space to practice these skills, speaking aloud. If not, that is fine too. There's just one thing I would add to the discussion of class presentations, which is that I think presenting on Zoom is really different feeling than presenting to a live audience. Then the basic difference is you don't get a lot of audience feedback that way. A lot of people do keep their cameras off, and it makes it a little bit harder to sort of gauge how your presentation is going down with your audience, which I think some people like because it makes them feel less nervous. But I think for me, I find it very challenging because it's just hard to gauge kind of what people are thinking, what their reactions are. So that's something maybe just to be aware of kind of going into the semester. So thank you so much for joining us. I won't keep you past 10 o'clock, but again, I encourage you to check out the calendar of events happening this week and next for orientation. We do have some in-person events going on as well, and if you are here in Columbus, definitely check those out because it's a great way to meet some other new students. So welcome to Ohio State, and thanks again for joining us. If you